The stars themselves seemed to weep blood across the galaxy. For 3,000 years, the Crimson War had torn through space like a wild beast that refused to die. Two mighty civilizations fought with such fury that entire solar systems had become graveyards floating in the endless dark. On one side stood the Zerathi Empire, proud warriors who believed honor came only through battle. Their massive ships looked like flying fortresses, covered in thick armor that could withstand the heat of dying stars. These beings stood tall as trees, with skin like polished metal and eyes that burned with the fire of 1,000 suns. Fought because their ancestors had fought and their ancestors before them. War was not just what they did, it was who they were. On the other side lurked the void-born collective creatures that moved like living shadows through space. They did not think as individuals, but as one giant mind spread across millions of bodies. Their ships were strange things that seemed to grow rather than be built. Black as the space between stars and covered in what looked like breathing skin. They fought because they had to survive, because the universe was cruel and only the strong could live. The battlefield stretched across light years. Planets that once held beautiful cities now spun as burned rocks in the void. Moons had been shattered into rings of debris. Gas giants had their atmospheres stripped away, leaving only their naked cores behind. The very fabric of space seemed scarred from weapons that could crack worlds in half. Both sides had weapons that could destroy entire fleets in seconds. The Zerathi used beams of pure energy that could cut through anything, while the Voidborn unleashed swarms of living metal that ate through ship hulls like acid. When they clashed, the explosions could be seen from neighboring star systems. Billions had died. Trillions more lived in fear as the war spread like a disease across the galaxy. Trade routes that had existed for thousands of years were now death traps. Peaceful worlds built bunkers deep underground, hoping the war would pass them by. Children grew up never knowing what peace looked like. The strangest thing about this war was that neither side could win. They were too evenly matched, too stubborn, too proud to surrender. The Zerathi would rather die than admit defeat, while the Voidborn could not conceive of stopping their expansion. It was like watching two giants punch each other until the end of time, while everyone else cowered in the shadows. Other species had tried to help. The wise Zephyrians had offered their knowledge. The ancient depths dwellers had shared their secrets. Dozens of smaller civilizations had begged both sides to stop, but nothing worked. The war had become bigger than any single species could. Handled as the years passed, many began to believe this was simply how things would always be. The Crimson War was not just a conflict anymore, it was a fact of life, like gravity or the speed of light. The galaxy was doomed to bleed forever, caught between two forces that would never stop fighting. But sometimes, when everything seems hopeless, the universe has a way of surprising everyone. The great crystal dome of the Galactic Council had never seen such fear. Representatives from hundreds of worlds sat in their floating chairs, their voices creating a chorus of worry that echoed through the massive chamber. The air itself seemed thick with desperation as beings from across the galaxy gathered for what many believed would be their final meeting. Ambassador Tethkara stood at the center podium, her forearms spread wide as she addressed the crowd. Her species had been mediating conflicts for over 10,000 years, but even she looked defeated. Her usually bright purple skin had turned a dull gray, and her voice cracked as she spoke the words everyone feared to hear. My friends, she began, her voice carrying to every corner of the dome. The war has reached the point of no return. Our analysts predict that within 50 years, the Crimson War will consume every inhabited system in this galaxy. A wave of frightened whispers swept through the chamber. The Zephyrians, those brilliant crystal beings who could calculate the movement of stars with perfect accuracy, had been working day and night on their massive computers. Their leader, a towering creature that looked like living diamond, rose, slowly to speak. Our calculations are clear, the Zephyrian said, its voice sounding like wind chimes in a storm. We have run over 10 million simulations. Every single one ends the same way. Total mutual destruction. The Zerathi and Voidborn will not stop until they have destroyed each other and us along with them. The ancient depths dwellers, who had lived in the deepest oceans of their homeworld for millions of years, spoke next. Their representative was older than most civilizations, a being of such wisdom that other species traveled light years just to hear its advice. But today, even this ancient creature had nothing to offer. "In all my years," the depths dweller said through its translator, "I have never seen a conflict that defied all logic. These two species fight not for resources or territory, but for the very right to exist. They have become so consumed by hatred that they cannot see any path except destruction." One by one, the greatest minds in the galaxy admitted defeat. The scholars of Zarian had studied every war in recorded history, but found no solution. The peaceful ones of Harmony Prime had tried to send meditation beams to both fleets, hoping to calm their rage, but the ships had simply destroyed the transmission stations. Even the Merchants Guild, who could usually find profit in any situation, had given up trying to trade with either side. The neutral worlds were already preparing for the worst. Some were building massive underground cities, hoping to survive the coming storm. Others were loading their people onto generation ships, ready to flee to distant galaxies. The lucky ones were simply trying to enjoy their final years in peace. As the meeting continued, the horrible truth became clear. The galaxy's greatest civilizations, working together, could not stop two species from destroying everything. The Crimson War had become like a black hole, pulling everything into its deadly embrace. Hope was dying, and no one knew how to save it. The Horizon had been on a routine mapping mission when everything went wrong. Captain Minho was enjoying his morning coffee in the quiet of deep space when Navigator Jian suddenly gasped at her console. "Captain, you need to see this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Minho walked over to the main view screen and felt his blood turn to ice. Spread across the void before them was the largest battle he had ever seen. Thousands of ships, each one the size of a small city, were tearing each other apart with weapons that lit up space like deadly fireworks. "My God," whispered Hyunwoo from his engineering station. "How many ships are out there?" "Sensors are picking up over 5,000 vessels," Gion replied, her hands shaking as she worked her controls. "Captain, some of these ships are bigger than our entire space station back home." The crew watched in shocked silence as massive explosions bloomed across the battlefield. Ships that had taken decades to build were being destroyed in seconds. The Zirathi vessels looked like flying mountains covered in armor, firing beams of energy that could cut through anything. The Voidborn ships moved like living things, releasing clouds of smaller craft that swarmed around their enemies like angry insects. Madik Suyang joined them at the view screen, her face pale. "How long has this been going on?" she asked. "According to the energy readings, this single battle has been raging for 3 days straight," Hyunwoo said. "The power output from those weapons could supply our entire planet for a year." Suddenly, alarms began blaring throughout the ship. Both alien fleets had detected the small human vessel. On the communications screen, two very different faces appeared side by side. One was the proud, metallic features of a Zarathi commander. The other was the shifting, shadow-like form of a Voidborn collective node. "Unknown vessel," the Zarathi commander spoke in a voice like grinding metal. "You have entered a combat zone. Identify yourself or be destroyed." At the same time, the Voidborn collective spoke in dozens of voices that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Small ship, you do not belong here. Leave now or become part of the ending." The crew looked at their captain, waiting for orders. Any sane person would have turned around and fled as fast as possible. These were the two most powerful military forces in the galaxy, and they had just threatened to destroy the tiny human ship. But Minho did something that surprised everyone, including himself. Instead of choosing one side to talk to, he opened communications to both fleets at the same time. "This is Captain Minho of the human vessel Horizon," he said calmly, "speaking to both of your commanders because I have something important to say. We're not here to fight anyone. We're explorers, and we've never seen anything like this before." The bridge fell silent. Both alien commanders stared at the screen in shock. In 3,000 years of war, no one had ever dared to speak to both sides at the same time. The silence that followed was the kind that happens right before lightning strikes. Both alien commanders stared at the small human ship, their massive fleets holding fire for the first time in months. No one in the galaxy had ever been bold enough to speak to both sides of the Crimson War. At the same time, Commander Vexstar of the Zerathi fleet was the first to break the silence. His metallic face twisted into what might have been confusion. "Human," he said slowly, "do you understand what you have done? You dare to speak to both the Honorable Zerathi and these shadow spawn as equals." The Voidborn collective node responded with voices that seemed to come from 1,000 throats at once. The small flesh beings show either great courage or great foolishness. We are curious which. Captain Minho took a deep breath. His crew watched him with wide eyes, knowing they were witnessing something that had never happened before. Communications Officer Yunji sat ready at her station, her fingers dancing over the translation controls to make sure both sides understood every word. "I'm going to ask you both something," Minho said calmly, "and I want honest answers. Did this war actually start? Not the official date, but the real beginning? Do either of you actually remember?" The question hit like a physical blow. Commander Vexstar's eyes narrowed. "We fight because they are the enemy. They expand and consume. They threaten all life. We fight because they attack the Voidborn," responded. "They seek to destroy our unity. They bring chaos to order. But why?" Minho pressed. "What was the very first disagreement? What started it all?" For several long moments, neither commander answered. The question seemed to hang in space between the massive fleets like a puzzle that couldn't be solved. Historian Jin Woo stepped forward from his station. "Captain, permission to share something with our new friends?" Minho nodded, and Jin Woo activated his historical database. Images began flowing across the communication screen, pictures of Earth throughout its bloody history. The humans have fought wars too, Jinwoo said quietly. "We've had conflicts that lasted for generations. Catholics and Protestants killed each other for centuries. Nations fought over tiny pieces of land for so long that people forgot why the fighting started. Families passed down hatred like it was a family treasure. Images showed ancient battlefields, medieval castles under siege, and modern cities reduced to rubble. But then the pictures changed to show something different. Former enemies working together, building hospitals, sharing technology, raising families. The thing is," Jinwoo continued, "we discovered something important. Of our longest wars weren't really about the things we said we were fighting for. They were about fear, pride, and the simple fact that fighting had become our normal way of life." Commander Vexstar's expression shifted slightly. "You suggest we fight from habit?" "We suggest," Min Ho said gently, "that maybe you've been fighting so long that you've forgotten how to do anything else." The alien commanders fell silent, and for the first time in 3,000 years, both fleets stopped shooting at each other. What happened next shocked both alien fleets more than any weapon could have. The humans asked to split up and visit both sides, not as spies or enemies, but as observers who wanted to understand. Against all military logic, both commanders agreed to this impossible request. Captain Minho led half his crew aboard the massive Zerathi battleship Honor's Edge. The ship was like walking inside a metal mountain. Everything was built for beings twice the size of humans, with corridors wide enough to drive vehicles through. The walls were covered in symbols that told the story of every battle the crew had fought. Psychologist Nari walked beside Commander Vexstar, her tablet recording everything she saw. The Zerathi warriors they passed stood at attention, their metallic skin gleaming under the harsh lights. Each one bore scars from countless battles, worn like badges of honor. "Tell me about your childhood," Nari asked the commander as they walked. Through the ship's main corridor, Vexstar looked surprised by the question. "Childhood. We do not have childhoods as you understand them. From the moment we can walk, we train for war. From the moment we can speak, we learn the names of our enemies." Meanwhile, the other half of the human crew experienced something completely different aboard the Voidborn vessel. Engineer Hunwoo and medic Su Yang found themselves inside what looked more like a living organism than a ship. The walls seemed to breathe, and strange lights pulsed along what might have been veins or cables. The Voidborn Collective, node that guided them, spoke through multiple voices at once. We are not individuals as you are. We are many minds sharing one purpose. The war is not something we do, it is something we are. Stu Young noticed something disturbing as they moved through the ship. How long has it been since your people knew peace? She asked. Peace? The collective voices seemed confused. We do not understand this word. There is survival, and there is ending. Nothing else exists. Back on the Zarathi ship, Nari was making similar discoveries. She watched young Zarathi warriors training in combat simulators, their movements precise and deadly. But when she asked them about their dreams, about what they wanted to do after the war, they stared at her with blank expressions. After the war? One young warrior asked. There is no after. There is only the next battle. As the hours passed, a terrible picture began to form in Nari's mind. Both species had been fighting for so long that they had forgotten how to be anything else. The Zarathi defined their entire culture around military honor and the glory of battle. The Voidborn had evolved into a collective consciousness that existed only to survive and expand. Neither side could remember a time before the war. Languages had developed new words for different types of combat, but had lost words for peace, art, and simple joy. Children grew up knowing only the enemy, not knowing what they were actually fighting to protect. The war had become more than a conflict. It was their religion, their purpose, their very reason for existing. They were trapped in a cage made of their own hatred, and they had forgotten that the door was never locked. Data analyst Tai Young had always been good with numbers, but the information he was looking at made no sense at all. For 3 days straight, he had been going through battle reports, resource charts, and territorial maps from both alien fleets. What he found kept him awake at night, staring at his computer screen with growing disbelief. Captain, he called out, his voice shaking slightly. You need to see this. I think I've figured out why this war never ends, and it's not what anyone thinks. The crew gathered around Taeyong's workstation as he pulled up his analysis on the main screen. Charts and graphs filled the display, showing 3,000 years of conflict data in neat, colorful lines. Look at this, he said, pointing to a resource map. The Zarathi control system's rich in metals and energy sources. The Voidborn control region's perfect for expansion and growth. Neither side is actually trying to take what the other has. Navigator Gion frowned. What do you mean? Of course they're fighting over territory. No, they're not, Taeyong replied, his excitement growing. Watch this. He overlaid battle maps from different centuries. For the last 1,000 years, the front lines have barely moved. Both sides have had opportunities to deliver crushing defeats, but they always pull back at the last moment. Captain Minho studied the data carefully. Are you saying they're not trying to win? I'm saying they can't let themselves win, Taeyong explained. Look at the Zarathi cultural records. Their entire society is built around the concept of facing a worthy enemy. Their religion, their art, their government, everything depends on having this great enemy to fight against. He switched to data from the Voidborn Collective, and look here. The Voidborn's collective consciousness formed around shared trauma from the early war years. The war isn't just something they're fighting, it's literally what holds their minds together. If the war ended, their collective identity would collapse. Psychologist Nari gasped as she realized what Taeyong was suggesting. They're both addicted to the conflict itself. Exactly, Taeyong nodded. The Zarathi need the Voidborn to exist so they can prove their honor. The Voidborn need the Zarathi to exist so their collective consciousness has a purpose. It's like two people who hate each other but can't live without each other. He pulled up economic data that made the truth even clearer. Both civilizations have massive military industries that employ billions of their people. Their entire economies depend on building weapons and fighting this war. If peace broke out tomorrow, both societies would completely collapse. The horrifying reality settled over the human crew like a dark cloud. This wasn't a war in the traditional sense at all. It was a sick relationship between two civilizations that had become so twisted by 3,000 years of conflict that they literally couldn't survive without each other. "So what happens if we actually succeed in making peace?" asked Medic Su Young quietly. Tae-young looked at his data one more time. "Dot, da, da." "I think," he said slowly, "that might be the most dangerous thing of all." The great crystal dome of the Galactic Council had never hosted such a strange presentation. Captain Minho stood at the center podium, a small human figure surrounded by hundreds of alien representatives who towered over him. His crew flanked him on both sides, their simple uniforms looking out of place among the elaborate robes and armor of the galaxy's most powerful beings. Ambassador Tethkara introduced them with obvious skepticism. "The Council recognizes Captain Minho of the human vessel Horizon. You claim to have new information about the Crimson War?" Minho nodded and activated his presentation. The dome, filled with Tae-young's data, charts, graphs, and analysis that painted a picture no one wanted to see. "Honored representatives," Minho began, his voice calm despite the magnitude of what he was about to say. "The Crimson War is not what you think it is. Both the Zirathi and Voidborn are trapped in a cycle they cannot break alone. They don't fight to win anymore, they fight because they've forgotten how to do anything else." Gasps echoed through the chamber as the data revealed the shocking truth. The crystalline Zephyrians studied the numbers with their perfect logic, while the ancient depths dwellers whispered among themselves in their old language. "This is impossible," declared a Zarathi representative who had somehow made it to the council chambers. "We fight for honor, for justice, for the protection of all civilized beings." And that's exactly the problem. Psychologist Nari stepped forward. "Your entire identity depends on having an enemy. Both species have become so addicted to conflict that peace would destroy you from within." The council erupted in angry voices. Some species called the humans liars, others demanded proof, and a few sat in stunned silence as they realized the terrible truth. But Minho wasn't finished. "We have a solution," he announced, his words cutting through the noise like a blade. "But you're not going to like it." The chamber fell silent. Data analyst Tae-young activated the long-range sensor data they had been analyzing during their journey to the council station. The dome filled with images of deep space, showing something that made everyone's blood run cold. "3 months ago, our sensors detected this," Tae-young said. The images showed a massive structure moving through the void between galaxies. It was bigger than anything anyone had ever seen, a construction of metal and unknown materials that dwarfed entire star systems. "It's heading straight for our galaxy," Engineer Hyun-woo added. "At current speed, it will arrive in less than 2 years. Whatever it is, it's not natural, and it's not friendly." Minho stepped forward again. "The only way to stop this thing is to get the Zarathi and Voidborn to work together. Force them to fight side by side against a real threat. Give them a new purpose that doesn't involve destroying each other." The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Ambassador Tethkara spoke. "You want us to risk everything on an untested theory? To force two civilizations that have been killing each other for 3,000 years to suddenly become allies?" "Yes," Minho said simply. "Because if we don't, there won't be a galaxy left to save." Harmony 7 was supposed to be the perfect neutral meeting place. Built in empty space between star systems, the station had been designed by the peaceful Zephyrians to host diplomatic meetings. Its clean white corridors and calm lighting were meant to promote cooperation and understanding. But nothing could have prepared it for what was about to happen. Captain Minho watched through the observation deck as the first volunteers arrived. 12 Zirathi warriors stepped off their transport ship, their metallic skin gleaming under the station's lights. They moved in perfect formation, their hands never far from their weapons, eyes scanning for threats that weren't there. Minutes later, the Voidborn Collective arrived. 15 shadowy figures flowed from their organic vessel like living smoke. They didn't walk so much as drift, their forms shifting and changing as they moved. The air around them seemed to grow colder. "This is going to be interesting," muttered xenobiologist Chae-young as she checked her translation equipment one more time. The first meeting was a disaster. Engineer Dong-yoon had prepared a simple briefing room with chairs arranged in a circle. Thinking both species could sit and talk like civilized beings, the Zirathi immediately claimed the seats facing the door, positioning themselves for battle. The Voidborn refused to sit at all, instead forming a shifting mass in the corner that made everyone nervous. "We will not show weakness by sitting," with shadow spawn, declared Zerathi, Commander Kexanol. "The Metal Ones speak of weakness while hiding behind chairs." The Voidborn collective responded in their many voices. Within minutes, both sides were standing, hands on weapons, ready to continue their ancient war right there in the conference room. Shuing quickly activated the emergency shields, separating the two groups before violence could break out. "Well," Dongyun said, looking at the two groups glaring at each other through the energy barrier. "That didn't go as planned. The second attempt was even worse." Dongyun tried to get both species to work on a simple engineering problem together, repairing a damaged communication array. The Zerathi approached it like a military operation, assigning ranks and following strict protocols. The Voidborn tried to merge with the equipment, treating it like a living thing that needed to be understood rather than fixed. "You corrupt the machine with your unnatural touch," shouted a Zerathi engineer. "You wound the metal life with your crude tools." The Voidborn replied. The argument escalated until the Zerathi were using welding torches as weapons, and the Voidborn were trying to dissolve the equipment with some kind of acid secretion. Cha-Yung had to flood the room with sleeping gas too. Stop them from destroying everything, but humans are nothing if not adaptable. On the third day, Cha-Yung had a breakthrough. Instead of trying to get both species to work the same way, she separated them completely. The Zerathi got their own workshop where they could follow their rigid military procedures. The Voidborn got a different space where they could flow and merge and do whatever felt natural to them. The magic happened when both groups were working on the same problem, but in their own ways, connected only by human translators who carried ideas back and forth between them. The alarm bells on Harmony 7 screamed through every corridor as the extragalactic scouts finally arrived. Captain Minho rushed to the command center, where Zerathi warriors and Voidborn collective nodes were working side by side for the first time in 3,000 years. The sight still amazed him. Beings who had been trying to kill each other, just months ago now, sharing the same space. "Contact in 30 minutes, announced Cha-Yung from her sensor station. 3 scout vessels, each one the size of a small moon. The enemy ships looked like nothing anyone had ever seen. They were dark, angular things that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Strange energy patterns danced across their hulls, and they moved through space in ways that defied all known physics. Commander Kexanol of the Zerathi stood ready at the tactical display. "My ships are in position. We await your orders, human friend Minho." The Voidborn collective node pulsed with nervous energy. "Our vessels merge and flow. You're ready to dance the death song with the far darkness." What happened next would be remembered for generations. The joint fleet moved as one organism, Zerathi ships, providing heavy firepower and strong armor, while Voidborn vessels flowed around the enemy like liquid mercury, striking from impossible angles. Human coordinators like Dongyun and Gion served as translators, helping both species understand each other's tactics in real time. The battle was fierce, but brief. The extragalactic scouts had expected to face a divided galaxy, not a unified force. When their weapons met Zerathi, shields backed by Voidborn adaptive technology, the alien invaders found themselves outmatched for the first time in their long journey across the void, as the last enemy ship exploded in a burst of strange light. Something incredible happened. Zerathi warriors and Voidborn collective members cheered together. Not the war cries they had used against each other, but genuine celebration of a shared victory. "We did it," whispered Suyang, tears in her eyes. They actually did it. But the real miracle happened in the days that followed. Instead of going back to their old war, both species wanted to learn more about each other. Zerathi engineers became fascinated by Voidborn biotechnology. Voidborn collective nodes were amazed by Zerathi artistic traditions they had never noticed during the fighting. The transformation was slow but steady. Battle stations became research facilities. Weapons factories started producing exploration ships. Children from both species began learning each other's languages through human-designed exchange programs. Captain Minho stood in his new office aboard the Interspecies Cooperation Initiative headquarters, watching mixed crews working together on peaceful projects. Nari had been right. The war had become their identity. But humans had shown them something better. Sometimes the oldest problems needed the freshest eyes. Sometimes enemies just needed someone to remind them they could be friends. And sometimes a small species from a little blue planet could change the entire galaxy simply by asking the right questions. The Crimson War was finally over. Not with conquest or surrender, but with understanding.